All right, guys. AP Environmental. I just want to go over this first FRQ question with you for unit number 3. If you've completed this already, wonderful. Maybe you want to pull it up, and you should be able to see your answers and also see the feedback in the buzz assignment. I just want to quickly go over this with you. So this is kind of a typical question that you might see on an AP exam where they give you a passage. And we read over this in class the other day if you weren't here, or if you were a virtual student. This paragraph just talks about the gorillas and some of their interactions, in their habitat. And it also talks a little bit about their reproductive strategies in the second paragraph. So we've got 3 questions here that are all pretty straightforward, pretty direct. The first question, based on the information above, is the western lowland gorilla an R selected or K selected species? Then provide evidence to support your answer. So you'll notice that there's 3 points for that question. At least that's how the AP graders would grade it. I'm going to grade this a little bit differently, and I'll explain in a minute how I'm going to do that. But I did mention it in my agenda. But for this question, you would have been expected to choose whether or not it's an R or a K, and then state some reasons why you chose that. Basically, provide some evidence. So if you look down here at the bottom, for my answers, and this is actually not my answers, but this is what the AP graders provided for us. The lowland gorilla is a K-selected species. So if you chose that, then you would have gotten 1 point. And then the other 2 points would have came from providing some evidence. Well, whenever they ask you to provide evidence, it's kind of vague as far as like how much evidence they want you to provide. I usually tell kids, maybe come up with 2 things that you think are really good pieces of evidence that would support your answer. More than 2, unless they ask you for more than 2, I wouldn't worry too much about it. But I wouldn't be safe just giving 1 thing. I would probably try to give at least 2, and just make sure they're good ones. So, for example, here, long time to reach sexual maturity, 15 years for males, 8 to 10 for females. That's definitely kind of a characteristic of a K species. That's what gorillas do. Low numbers of offspring, right, or low fecundity. We talked about that the other day. That would be a good piece of evidence to provide. And they have long lifespans, right? So, I mean, you're not limited to just these answers, but these would have been pretty good answers to give. Again, try to give at least 2. I would just say give 2 things. So that would probably be the safe thing. All right, question B, identify and explain 4 community interactions that involve the western lowland gorilla. Now, for this question, pretty much this first paragraph is talking all about these different interactions. And you just have to kind of read it carefully, maybe even underline things as you're going through it, highlight things, whatever. And you have to not only identify an interaction, but kind of explain it as well. So, for example, one answer you might have given was competition, right? That's a type of interaction, and that exists between gorillas and humans for crops, right? It mentions in the paragraph that the gorillas aren't invading farmland or whatever to feed off of crops that are obviously there by humans. Parasitism with the Ebola virus, right? So again, we're not only mentioning the type of interaction, but we're kind of explaining, what that interaction is with, or at least what organism it's with in the paragraph. Herbivory, that's the one that maybe you didn't quite get. Maybe you did. I don't know. When it comes to feeding on plants, I guess you could have probably put predation down for that, because herbivory is a type of predation. But you could have also just mentioned predation when feeding on insects. And you could have also mentioned that, that the gorillas are prey. They're kind of the opposite end of the predation relationship when being fed upon by leopards. So you had to come up with 4. There was 5 that they gave you in the paragraph. So again, identify the type of interaction, right, and then kind of give me a brief description of it, I suppose, or explanation. And finally, the last question, explain what's meant by secondary succession. Okay, so that's probably worth 1 point right there, right? Explaining what's meant by secondary succession. And describe how it may be initiated in a tropical forest. All right, so just this kind of goes to our back to our last unit. Secondary succession is succession that occurs on an area of land that is devoid of some or most of its vegetation. So that means some of its vegetation's been removed for whatever reasons, but has not experienced complete destruction of its soil. This is a really critical part of describing secondary succession. You have to make sure that the reader is aware that that there is still soil intact. Okay, if not, then it would be primary succession. Now, in a rainforest, the secondary communities are mainly the trees and lush vegetation. That's probably just some additional information to provide, but I think that first sentence is really critical to explaining what secondary succession is. Then you had to kind of just describe how it can be initiated. What are some things that could cause that vegetation to be removed? And there's probably two answers that are really common. One of them is just deforestation, right? Removing the forest for whatever reasons. Lumber, timber companies do this. That's a really common thing. The other one would be forest fires, and that can be either natural or anthropogenic. Obviously, that would kind of force secondary succession. And here's one that a lot of people don't write about. We'll talk more about this one when we get into our unit on agriculture. But there is a lot of farmland in rainforests. Believe it or not, they actually remove rainforests to grow crops. But if they abandon that farm, if they just like leave it, which in a lot of cases that they do that in the rainforest, they just cut down the trees, they'll grow crops, and then they'll leave, right? And if they do that, that could force secondary succession as well. So that was one you may not be too familiar with, but it's still a pretty good answer, and one as the year goes on that you may be more prone to give. So, all right, guys, that's it for me. Check over your answers, kind of grade yourself. For this particular problem set, when I graded this, I graded it mainly on completion. Like I looked through, did you answer each question, give a good attempt, and I focused on this particular question as well. I really nitpicked this one, question A. On future FRQs, I'll do the same thing. I will focus on one component of it, and if I feel that you didn't answer this up to my satisfaction, I will take a couple points off. So if you got a 10 out of 10, you pretty much answered that question the way I wanted it to, and you also gave a good attempt on the other ones. If you got like an 8 out of 10 or something, then I wasn't too happy with the way that you answered this particular question. All right, and I probably made that in the comments section of your score. Okay. So anyway, all right, guys, have a good day, and that is it for me.